Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on black soldier fly larvae composting. We're thrilled to have our expert speaker, Dr. Laura Ingwell, Assistant Professor in the Department of Entomology at Purdue University, here to share her insights on this fascinating topic. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and go over a few housekeeping notes. My name is Laura Coates, and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Our mission is to protect Nebraska's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement. We do this through locally led education efforts and community projects that address conservation concerns across the state. Now for a few quick housekeeping items. If you're joining us online, your cameras are off and microphones are muted throughout the presentation. Please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat or Q&A section. We'll address them during or after the presentation. After the webinar, we'll share a brief survey that takes less than a minute to complete. Your feedback helps us continue offering programs like this, so we appreciate your feedback in the survey. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube at a later date in case you'd like to revisit it or share it with others. If you're interested in connecting with the Conservation Nebraska team member or learning more about our work, you can reach us at info@anyconserve.org, and I'll type that email in the chat as well. With that, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Laura Ingwell, and Laura, I will let you take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. So I am excited to share with you today some of the research I have been doing with my graduate students over the past few years, playing around with this amazing insect called the black soldier fly. Okay, let me switch this again. Okay, great. So as Laura mentioned in the introduction, I am with Purdue University. I am an extension specialist. So in my position there, I work with fruit and vegetable growers of all sorts. Anyone from someone growing hundreds of acres of watermelon to send to grocery stores, to someone who has a potted tomato on their patio and they want to learn how to keep insects off of it, or recruit pollinators to help with production. And I stumbled into the black soldier fly, which at first you may not see as being related to specialty crop production, but hopefully I can make the connection for you. So today we're talking specifically about composting with this very beautiful insect. So there's a lot of different reasons or motivations behind why people compost or why we compost as a society. Some of the biggest drivers are to reduce organic waste that enter landfills, right? So it's a way to take that vegetation and keep it in the ecosystem rather than burying it in plastic underground. Another, and I think one of the biggest ways, is that it's a great way to help build soil health. Soil health is something that's constantly depleting or eroding in a lot of our agricultural systems. In urban agriculture in particular, where we're trying to grow in a place that may have once had a building or a factory or an impervious parking lot, the soil quality tends to be quite low and oftentimes even contaminated. So we can think about using compost as a resource and a tool to help rebuild soil health. And a lot of other different motivations of why we may want to compost. A lot of times incorporating composting on your farm or in your backyard is met with a few challenges, right? If we think about traditional composting methods, the time to get mature compost, if you're basing it on anaerobic or aerobic, composting is quite long, right? And it can be very challenging in a backyard setting to get the temperature high enough to be able to kill pathogens that may be present in the materials you add to the compost. It can also be very challenging to find space, especially if you generate large volumes of organic waste when it's sitting around for a year or so before you can put it back into the soil. Again, space becomes a very expensive commodity. So sometimes setting space aside for composting doesn't work. Sorting inputs. So a lot of times if we think about trying to compost at a larger scale, like municipalities or even on our college campus, it can take a lot of time to sort out meats and fats and oils and utensils. It sort of depends on the method of composting you're doing, but sometimes it can take a lot of inputs to get just the right ingredients. And sometimes it can generate really stinky smells as well, right? But there have been innovations when it comes to composting in recent years. One of those, especially for the backyard composter, is that, there's been a lot of innovation in composting bins. So something that's getting the material up off the soil so that it's cleaner and you have less pest attached to it. It also, in some situations, helps to speed the process because in these dark plastic bins, you're increasing the heat and therefore increasing the time that it takes to break down these materials. Another method is to use worms in vermicomposting. So again, this reduces the time to generate mature compost. And it's also an opportunity for you to be able to bring that compost system indoors and compost all year round. And then when we think about it again on the sort of municipality large scale, we have biodigesters that are sort of a centralized facility, and you can do large volume capacity to be able to compost at the city level. But I want to share with you today a fairly new to me insect that we can use for composting. And this is the black soldier fly. So its scientific name is Hermetia illucens. This fly is native to neotropical regions, so it's used to warm, humid weather. At this point, they have been distributed throughout the globe and can be found on every continent except Antarctica. They do not bite, sting, nor spread diseases. So, in terms of human risks with this fly, they're fairly benign. They don't hurt humans, they don't hurt other animals. They are detritivores, so they feed on dead and decaying organic matter. They have sort of gotten the spotlight lately because they are one of the new species of insects that are utilized for protein production and for bioremediation, so managing waste at the municipal level. Um, and for protein production, you can think of them like crickets and mealworms. At this point, they're grown mostly as an ingredient in feedstock for a lot of different livestock or pets. And in some places in the world, they are also used as a protein source for people. So just a reminder of the fly life cycle. Um, so they do go through what we call complete metamorphosis, meaning they have an egg that hatches into a larval stage. That larval stage progresses into a pupal or a resting stage where it then transforms into the adult itself. The ideal temperature for this life cycle to occur is between 24 and 40 degrees Celsius. And ideally, humidity levels would be between 30 and 90%. Like I mentioned, they're extremely voracious. So as they progress through those 5 larval stages, those are the only stages in their life where they're actually eating food, consuming organic materials. And during those stages, they eat quite a bit of organic matter. And then when they reach this pupal stage, or between the 5th instar and pupa, we call a pre-pupal stage, they naturally stop eating. They no longer need to acquire nutrients. Instead, they are preparing to convert those nutrients out of their fat body and into the adult form of the insect. In the process of the larval stages feeding on organic matter, there's been a lot of research looking at how they perform on different food sources or with different potential contaminants in that food. So they have been shown to reduce mycotoxins and pesticide residues that are present on plant material that they may be feeding on. When they're feeding on manure, They can reduce E. coli and Salmonella, which are pathogens that we have to worry about for human and animal health. They've also been shown to alleviate the bioavailability of heavy metals in the substrate after which they have fed on it. So these are all really beneficial ways to help create an organic waste material, which would be the compost or the frass from this insect, and at the same time, sort of a bioremediation process of removing some of these environmental contaminants. And if you are thinking about the composting part of this insect, all of the composting or the breakdown of organic material happens from the larval progressions from first to fifth larval instar. So the eggs take about 3 days to hatch into larva, and then the larvae eat for about 18 days. So in that time, they can produce a mature compost. So you can be harvesting mature compost every 21 days or so, depending a lot on temperature. So it's a very fast way to break down large amounts of organic material. So I am specifically interested in this insect in the context of small farms. How can we integrate composting with black soldier flies on small farms to help build soil health and to reduce organic waste from leaving the farm or leaving the community that the farm is situated in? And then how can we apply this digestate or this compost that they're creating to the production of crops on these farms? So I have 4 different research objectives that I've been investigating. The first one is to evaluate various feedstocks for black soldier fly growth, then to compare the application of the digestate or the compost created by soldier flies to other commercially available composts. We tried composting with farmers, so we gave them a bin and we gave them some flies and asked them how what that experience was like. And then we've been evaluating the impacts of this compost applied to specialty crop production, so on the crop health and some physical soil properties along the way. So the first bit of this work was done by one of my former graduate students, Catherine Terrell, and supported by the North Central SARE. And this is where all of the work that I've been doing with soldier flies really began. And I was very interested, again, in sort of an urban farming situation and creating a circular economy. So if you look in the middle of this diagram, you'll see that we have a very abbreviated version of the fly's life cycle. We have the adult, the larva, and the pupa. And the larva themselves are what's doing all of the consumption. So we've identified a variety of organic waste streams generated on or near urban farms. Can be manure from small livestock such as chicken. It can be food waste or traditional compost inputs. It can be plant waste. These are 3 viable food options that we can be feeding into that larva instead of putting them somewhere else on the farm or sending them to the landfill. The larvae then eat that food and turn it into either compost in the form of insect poop, which is called frass, or the larvae themselves, which are a viable source of protein and fat, like I mentioned. And so you could harvest them and feed them to that livestock that you recouped that manure from. And then we take this compost, we put it onto our specialty crop, and then we look at how does the crop perform, and any waste from that crop production goes back into that composting cycle. So the circularity of it is keeping these resources on the farm in this composting process and feeding it back into soil health and livestock production potentially. And so the first part was evaluating these different feedstock food resources and how do the flies perform when they develop on it, and then adding this new created resource of compost into our specialty crop. So first we evaluated 4 different food streams. The first is food waste. So this is off of your plate when you've finished eating. It's very diverse compared to the traditional ingredients in compost. So here we're talking about cooked food, cooked noodles, fats, oils, dairy, proteins, cheeseburger, like scraps, leftover bones after roasting a chicken, oil after cooking, sour milk, anything like that, putting in, that's what we classified as food waste. So it's been cooked, it contains oil, fat, meat, dairy. The next one was plant waste, or this is like the more traditional compost ingredients. So raw fruits and vegetables and leaves and stems out of the garden. Then we looked at spent worts, which came from a local brewery in town. So the brewer's grains after they're done with them in the beer making process. And then the last one was biosolids or manure. And in this case, our source of manure was sheep. And so we were very excited to see that we could, in fact, rear soldier flies on all of those different feedstocks. They performed better um, on the food waste and the spent worts than they did on the biosolids and the plant waste. It took them longer to mature, but they got there. But again, the focus was on the compost. So we took each of those single source composts and sent them off to a lab to be analyzed for, well, they called it a compost analysis, but here we're going to look at nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. So the NPK that's in the material. And then the next slide, I believe we'll look at organic matter. That may be coming up. So our controls here, or to use as comparisons, we have black cow, which is composted and commercially available cow manure, and we have a low nutrient potting mix. And so what we were most interested in is, in an ideal world, this compost generated from soldier flies would perform the same as traditional compost resources. So it could be used in place of or in addition to traditional composting. And so we were very excited to see that, in fact, in almost all of these, we do have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium available. And in most situations, the amount available exceeds that of our commercial traditional composted manure and exceeds that of the potting mix. The next thing we did was then add it to field soil, like you would a traditional compost, and measure the performance of 3 different crops. So we used 1 tomato variety, 2 carrot varieties, and 1 cucumber variety. And we divided each of those crops up into replicates of 3 different soil amendments. The first was the control field soil. We didn't add anything. The second was that black cow composted cow manure. And the third was soldier fly digestate, where we took and we just mixed all of those food streams into one bulk compost. And then we measured plant metrics. And we found here that when you grow cucumbers, so here we're looking at the yield of each of these crops, and when you grow cucumbers in these 3 different soil treatments, we actually found a significantly higher yield when we had the soldier fly compost applied and no difference between the black cow and the control. When we looked at tomato yield, we actually saw that we got the highest yield in our control plots where we added nothing to the soil. But most importantly, there was no difference between the black soldier fly and the composted cow manure. Those plants performed and yielded statistically the same amount of fruits. And then if we look at carrots here, this one's a little bit confusing because we have 2 different varieties of carrots. But on the left, we have navel carrot, which is your traditional long, regular sized carrot. And on the right, we have the 3 treatments across short and sweet, which is a miniature carrot variety. So in general, the weight and the plants are smaller because it's a smaller variety. But what we find is that the black soldier fly amended carrots are larger in both the navel variety and the short and sweet. So again, here we were excited to see that the soldier fly compost is actually outperforming the composted cow manure and resulting in higher yields of the crops. And so to summarize these impacts on yields, for cucumber, we saw numerically more fruit, but overall total volume, weight of all the fruits together, no differences. In tomatoes, we saw no difference, but numerically more fruit in our control plots again. And then in carrots, we saw the highest yields with the soldier fly digestate. So we were excited to learn that the BSF-derived amendment does perform as well as composted cow manure. And in the case of carrots, it actually outperformed when we're looking at it in terms of crop yield. Here again, if we look at the nutrient profiles now of that BSF digestate that was all pooled together from the the 4 different feedstocks compared to that composted cow manure, if we look first at our sources of NPK, we see much higher values that are available in the BSF-derived digestate. So higher nutrient content to start with. We also tend to see much higher of those macronutrients as well. And organic matter is the biggest one. So 92% organic matter in the BSF digestate. And organic matter is something that we're constantly trying to improve or build upon in the soil because it leads to improving other soil physical properties. But what we did see that was a bit concerning was elevated pH and extremely elevated amounts of soluble salts. Soluble salts for some plants that are sensitive to salt can impede root growth and water uptake and plant growth. I think that can be managed with the inputs that are going into the systems, but it's definitely something to monitor if you're utilizing this and make sure that you don't have crops that are sensitive, or if you already have a high pH in your soil, you may need to do something to help lower that pH. And then the next thing that Katie did was deploy soldier fly bins on grower farms. And so here we had fun watching lots of YouTube channels from people all over the world who compost with black soldier flies, and particularly are trying to rear them for protein production. So trying to get the flies to exit the bins so that they can collect them and use them for feed. So we developed 2 different styles. First, we had this 50-gallon drum that was cut in half and laid on its side. And then we had a smaller 18-gallon tote that we deployed. You can see here our farmers that participated were located throughout the state of Indiana. And we built 5 of each size bin and had 10 total participants. So 5 with the 50-gallon and 5 with the 18-gallon. And we gave this to them for one year, and we gave them instructions, and we seeded it with soldier flies at the start of the year. And then at the end of the year, we gave them a survey and asked them about their experience. And so we asked about a few different things when it came to the bin design, the durability, the user friendliness, the overall design, and the quality of the compost that came out of it. And so you can see what's not great for some of our users. This second from the top here is compost quality, user friendliness, and the design. We realized when you move down to OK, we also see the design comes out. 6 of our 10 participants were only OK with the design. So we recognize there's room for improvement. But we did get a few participants on the great and excellent in terms of durability, user friendliness, and some of them really did appreciate the quality of the compost. When we asked them, will you continue to compost with BSF beyond the duration of this project? 3 said definitely yes, and 4 said probably yes. So that's 7 out of 10, which is exciting for us. And we have 6 out of 10 saying yes, they would recommend this form of composting to people they know. So for us, that was really a win. Basically, they had a good experience. Then I got another graduate student who came after Katie. So this is Milena, who is finishing up right now. And she continued to work on this idea of building compost with black soldier flies. and expanded a little bit to look more broadly at insect-derived soil amendments. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some insects in commercial scale production for protein. So using these to make protein supplements for people and or livestock. And there is a lot of waste that these facilities generate, right? In the terms of the frass or the poop that these insects generate as they're being reared, but also in terms of the exuvia or the exoskeleton of the insect. So this is a picture of a cicada, but I just put this up for reference because many people are familiar with the sort of casting or the shell of the cicada. When it crawls out of the ground and the adults are getting ready to emerge, it crawls up onto a tree and the adult comes out the back and you're left with this crunchy shell. Well, all of these insects leave behind this crunchy shell as they are molting from one life stage to the next. And this is high in chitin, which is naturally found in soils and has been shown to improve crop growth and defense against pathogens in crops. So we looked at both frass and the exuvia from insects. So we used the black soldier fly frass again. We also collected their pupal cases or the black soldier fly exuvia. We used composted cow manure once again as our control, and we added this commercial product called chicken frass, which is cricket frass from cricket protein production facilities. And so here we're looking at the NPK content again. So nitrogen in gray, phosphate in blue, potash in orange. And we see all three of these insect-derived resources are much higher than our commercially available composted cow manure. And in some cases, with the exuvia, you see a very high levels of nitrogen. In the cricket frass, there's a lot of phosphorus, phosphate, and then the black soldier fly frass, we see the highest amount of potassium. And when we compare the organic matter values in each of these resources as well, we see it's very different. We see much higher organic matter in the insect-derived amendments compared to the composted animal manure. So then Milena took these resources to the field, and we again evaluated their impacts on a few different crops, as well as some soil physical properties. So Milena looked at carrots and bok choy. When it came to the bok choy yield, we found no differences among the amendment types that we were using. And again, our control here was just plain soil, field soil with no amendment. When it came to carrots, though, we see a slightly significant increase in carrot yield in terms of weight when we look at the 3 insect-derived resources compared to the control, which was unamended field soil. So some advantages here again for this below ground crop of carrot. And then we looked at some of these soil properties. So the 2 that we focused on was bulk density and aggregate stability. So bulk density is a measure of like how tightly packed the particles, the soil particles are in a given core volume of soil that's pulled straight from the field. Aggregate stability is sort of evaluating the glue in that soil and how stable is the glue in holding all those soil particles together. And for both of these measures, they're a measure essentially of compaction in the soil. And so the one that we found some significant and interesting results with was in the soil below our bok choy crop. When you look along the axes here, higher numbers are compaction and lower numbers is porosity. So more open space in that soil, open space for roots to go and explore and water to move through. And so we actually see increased porosity or a lower bulk density for black soldier fly frass, which was not different than our control, but it was different than the pupal cases and the cricket frass. So actually seeing evidence of more compaction in these samples when pupal cases and cricket frass is applied compared to the black soldier fly frass, but those did not differ from control. And we were very surprised to even see any results because measuring changes in soil physical properties over short periods of time, this happened across 2 years, was surprising, but it's exciting for us because it means that after time and with adjusting the amount of compost that we're adding, we could have some influence on some of these physical properties that can help improve crop growth. And so what's next for us? We are interested in looking at how these insect-derived amendments can impact plant defenses. So like I mentioned, the exuvia or the chitin that's present in that exuvia from the molting of the insects has been shown to increase the resistance of plants to fungal pathogens and sometimes to similarly some insects. So Milena is doing a greenhouse study to look at how bok choy treated with these different insect-derived soil amendments, how it impacts not only plant growth, but also herbivore performance of an aphid and a caterpillar on across these different soil treatments. And most importantly, what I'm most excited about is getting this out and on farms for farmers who think that it could fit in their farming system. And the biggest hurdle there is that bin design. If you're someone who wants to integrate soldier fly composting for the benefit of not only creating compost, but also to harvest the protein produced through the process, then we really need to improve the ability of these larvae to leave that composting system and be naturally sort of self-collected as a food source. And so this is a bin that I saw a farmer had on his farm in Florida with an improved design for the maggots to be able to crawl up these ramps and exit through these holes into protected little bins here that he would harvest and feed his chickens. And it was much more rain-proof with an actual metal roof on it and an opportunity to add insulation. Because these insects, like I mentioned, they're native to the neotropics. And we find them in cooler climates. They do make their way all the way to Indiana every year, but it takes time because they can't survive the winters here. So they have to migrate up from the south. They do not survive below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And so trying to create a bin that can facilitate survival, maintain a bit higher of a temperature in winter is what we're going for right now. And then again, improving that ability to self-harvest because separating the insects can be quite tedious if you actually want to use them for the protein production. If you're not interested in the protein part of it, then you can add the leftover larva into the garden as well. And they'll find their way out eventually, or they'll just become part of the soil. But it's a fairly new field, so we're still learning how to optimize the system in the context of sort of on-farm composting. But what we have learned through keeping a colony of our own is that you can take 1 gram of soldier fly eggs, which is very little, and feed them 24 kilograms of food waste. And what you get out of that is about 2.5 kilograms of protein and fat-packed pupa, which can be a feedstock, and 3 kilograms of compost. So they're very efficient at breaking down this organic matter and converting it into insect biomass. You don't get a lot of compost out of the system because they are very efficient, but you do take these large volumes of organic matter and break them down quite quickly and turn them into something that can help you build soil health on your farm. And so that is all I have. And I've been watching for some questions in the Q&A box and haven't seen any, but I would love to take questions if we have time.
Yeah, I actually thought of a question for you. So, you were talking about the exuvia in comparison with the frass has really high nitrogen levels. Do you know if that has any kind of concern for like nitrogen leaching and, like, because the proportion just looked really high compared to the frass where it was kind of equal. So is that a
Yes.
concern for farmers?
I mean, it could be. So I didn't go into the nitty-gritty details, but the way that we started out applying the compost and just a like, we have this much, so let's split up the volume equally across plants. Then when Milena came, we dialed it in and we were applying it as if it was a fertilizer. So we were looking at the soil properties and the nutrients in the field soil, and then the nutrient needs of the plants. And we were adding the amount of those insect amendments based on NPK needs of the crops that they were grown in. So in that way, we're very closely monitoring not just nitrogen, but also for one of them, there was really high phosphorus. And that's another issue with compost and high levels of phosphorus. So it's important, no matter what your compost source is, I think, to be doing soil tests and monitoring the levels of some of those nutrients that you can have leaching, depending on where you're growing and what those concerns are. So if you were putting tons and tons of it, that could happen.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I see in the Q&A, we have a question from Carmen. Do the flies eat any beneficial insects that might be an issue? The flies do not eat anything that is alive. So the answer is no. If a beneficial insect died and the carcass of that dead insect went into a compost bin, they would eat it. But they don't eat anything that's living. They only eat dead materials. And actually, if you live in the southern portion of the US and more tropical regions, this species is one of forensic value. It finds, colonizes cadavers. So just like some of the other fly species like blowflies, and they find their way quite quickly to dead organisms and help break down and decay organic matter, but not until it's dead. And the adults themselves they just have like a sponging mouth. And so they will drink water to stay hydrated, but they don't have a mouth to eat anything. And they make themselves look like wasps as a defense mechanism so that other insects don't try to eat them. But they do not sting. They don't have the capacity to sting.
Very interesting. I just wanted to let everybody know that I did launch our feedback survey, so that should be popped up on your screen. And we'd appreciate you taking some time to fill that out. We still have plenty more time for questions. If anybody has, an itching thought that they're just really wanting an answer to, go ahead and type that in the Q&A in the chat. And thank you also, Laura, for the presentation. Super interesting.
If any of you who are here do compost now, I encourage you to go out to your compost bin and dig towards the bottom. And it's very likely that these flies have found their way in. Carmen, if you want to start, especially if you're in an area where they will not overwinter, if you want to seed your compost bin with these flies, there are a lot of commercial suppliers that sell the flies for pet feed for reptiles. So you can get live soldier fly larvae from a variety of different websites. Simton is one, but if you just Google black soldier fly pet feed, and when you order them, you'll get little cups of live larvae, and you can just throw those larvae into your compost bin.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions for now. Would you be able to share your email address maybe with people in case they come up with some questions afterwards?
Yes, it was on my slide, which I realize is not up anymore. So I put it in the chat. It's just lingwell@purdue.edu. And if you also go online and search composting with black soldier flies, we have an extension bulletin guide to sort of help you get started.
Oh, that's super cool.
I could put a link to that in the chat too, if we have a minute.
Yeah, sure thing.
It has the old bin on it, which we're still trying to improve, so don't put too much into building the bins we have, but it gives a lot of basics of like feeding rates and things like that.
That's
Types
so
of
cool.
things you can put in. So there's the link for that.
I would just make sure to change it to posting to everybody because it has just a host and panelists.
Oh, thank you. There. Thanks for pointing that out, Laura.
No
Sweet.
problem.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you again for taking time to do this presentation tonight. It was super interesting.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
Have a good night.